DM Tools with MaxMcCool. This is episode 3B, covering angels, specifically the Planetar and the Solar. In this episode, I'm not going to be covering the lore behind angels in general, as I did that in the first part of this two-part series of episodes. So if you'd like, you can go back there and check out the lore that the Monster Manual provides to you about angels and kind of their characteristics, where they come from, and some of their flaws, really. Now, let us carry on to the Planetar. The Planetar covers page 17 in the D&D Monster Manual, and let's get right into it. Planetar. Planetars act as the weapons of the gods they serve, presenting a tangible representation of their deity's might. A planetar can call down rain to relieve a drought, or can loose an insect plague to devour crops. A planetar's celestial ears detect every falsehood, and its radiant eyes see through every deception. Planetars are muscular and hairless, and have opalescent green skin and white feathered wings. They tower over most humanoids, brandishing immense swords with grace. Sometimes sent to aid powerful mortals on important tasks for good, Planetars are especially fond of missions that involve battling fiends. Alright, let's move on to the stat block for the Planetar. The Planetar is a large celestial, it is lawful good alignment. It has an armor class of 19, which is natural armor. It has average hit points of 200, or 16d10 plus 112. Man, these angels just keep getting beefier and beefier. The Planetar has a walking speed of 40 feet and a flying speed of 120 feet. It has a strength of 24, a dexterity of 20, a constitution of 24, an intelligence of 19, a wisdom of 22, and a charisma of 25. The Planetar's saving throws include constitution plus 12, wisdom plus 11, and charisma plus 12. The Planetar has the skill of perception plus 11. The Planetar is resistant to radiant, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons. It is immune to the charmed, exhaustion, and frightened conditions. It has senses of true sight up to 120 feet and a passive perception of 21. Like the Deva, the Planetar can speak all languages and has telepathy up to 120 feet. The challenge rating of a Planetar is 16, so this is a pretty high up there creature that you would be plugging into your campaign or adventure. Now, onto the abilities. Angelic weapons. The Planetar's weapon attacks are magical. When the Planetar hits with any weapon, the weapon deals an extra 5d8 radiant damage, which is included in the attack. Divine awareness. The Planetar knows if it hears a lie. Ooh, that's cool. They're like living, breathing lie detector test. Very, very interesting. Could definitely use that to some interesting outcomes. Let's carry on though. Innate spellcasting. The Planetar's spellcasting ability is charisma, with a spell save DC of 20. The Planetar can innately cast the following spells, requiring no material components. At will, they can cast Detect Good and Evil and Invisibility on themselves only. 3 times a day, the Planetar can cast Blade Barrier, Dispel Evil and Good, Flame Strike, and Raise Dead. Once a day, the Planetar can cast each Commune, Control Weather, and Insect Plague. Magic resistance. The Planetar has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Now, onto actions. Multi-attack. The Planetar makes 2 melee attacks. Greatsword. Melee weapon attack, with plus 12 to hit, a reach of 5 feet on one target. On a hit, it deals average 21 or 4d6 plus 7 slashing damage, plus 22 average or 5d8 radiant damage. they can cause a lot of havoc. They can invoke a lot of damage to monsters or party members, anything that opposes them, I suppose. Healing Touch. 4 times a day. The Planetar touches another creature. The target magically regains average 30 or 68 plus 3 hit points and is freed from any curse, disease, poison, blindness, or deafness. All right, that's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. So for a Planetar, you could actually create an adventure or a campaign even that's a bit more action-packed than you would initially think. You know, you could create a pretty action-packed adventure with the Deva, but the Planetar seems to be tailor-made to be almost the foot soldier, if you would, of their deity. So you could take that in a very, very interesting way or path. You know, you could create a lot of things. Immediately, one of the things that comes to mind for me is you could have a Planetar that has been perhaps captured, let's say, by perhaps demons or devils, some form of enemy. You could even use perhaps a tyrannical emperor, empress, or warlord, or some form of authoritarian dictator or something like that, who has laid claim to the Planetar by some means and is making an effort to bend the Planetar to their own will so that they could fight for the kingdom or empire against its enemies, right? And you could create an adventure around that where the adventurers are charged with the task either by another angel that comes down, perhaps the Deva, as mentioned in the previous episode, comes down and informs them of a Planetar that has been kind of bound and shackled and is being held captive by said ne'er-do-well individual. This to me leads for a pretty interesting potential possibility of outcomes where the adventurers might have to traverse some distance and encounter some enemies or some creatures or monsters along their way to the kingdom, let's say, or the empire. And if they manage to even get in, they have to somehow figure out how to get to the cell or the dungeon or to the location where this Planetar is being held captive, right? And to free the Planetar for the sake of for the sake of the deity, for the sake of the Planetar's task or safety or, reascension into the divine plane, the celestial plane, right? You could even have it be that perhaps it's not a tyrant, but a form of like mad mage or something who somehow managed to trick and kidnap the Planetar and is using the Planetar as a conduit for some form of power, perhaps to reach ascension, right? I mean, as stated earlier in the lore, angels' judgments are almost never mistaken, but almost never does not mean never. So perhaps a quick-witted sorcerer or wizard was capable of tricking the Planetar or convincing them to assist them in some form of task or some form of objective in order to perhaps further along the Planetar's own task that was charged to them by the deity. Of course, this would be a lie, and the sorcerer or wizard would have captured the Planetar and is utilizing them in some way in order to fulfill the goals that they have in mind, right? I mean, you could even implement an instance where perhaps the sorcerer or wizard, as most wizards do, seeks out immortality and has come to the realization that they can only become immortal if they ascend to godhood, right? If they become deified. And if that's the case, then maybe this mad wizard, you could even use the tyrant here and the warlord actually, perhaps they are now using the Planetar and its capture and confinement as a bargaining chip, to see if maybe they can work out a deal with the deity in question or with perhaps other Planetars and Solars and Devas. Perhaps the big bad evil person is just trying to amass almost a repository of these divine celestial creatures and trying to absorb and take their powers from them, so the wizard or sorcerer can ascend to the levels of power and ability and immortality that these angels and deities have. Immediately what pops into my head is almost a Dr. Frankenstein type situation, where you have a sorcerer or a wizard or even a tyrant, a tyrannical warlord, or a king or queen or emperor who's, suddenly become obsessed with the notion of being immortal and having their legacy last for eternity. And so they, by means of their head wizard or sorcerer or, vizier or whatever you'd have, at their side, they create kind of a facility, like a lab of sorts, where they try to capture and contain these planetars and set them up, in like test tubes or like on a rack or something. And they're all connected to this strange device. Maybe there's like a gemstone, a giant stone that's, conducting or absorb the power and send it out to the tyrant or wizard or what have you to give them their power, and perhaps your party has become privy to this information and has been charged with the task to stop them from a deva, which is a messenger type angel. Perhaps if your party has a paladin or cleric, which hopefully it would, healers help. Please, once in a while, be a cleric or something. Help the party out. But anyway, I digress. You could have the deity that the paladin or cleric worships, have them send down an angel and almost interact with them and discuss with them the situation at hand and tell them that they must go and stop this individual from trying to obtain this kind of perverted, corrupted version of immortality, right? You could have it appear as a dream or as a vision as well. And the party is just charged with taking on this task. You could have it unfold in that matter, where perhaps the party is just charged with the task of maybe doing a reconnaissance mission on this neighboring kingdom or this neighboring empire, where for some reason, they've suddenly taken up an aggressive stance and they're trying to embark on some weird conquest to claim more territory and increase their size, much to the chagrin of the other imperial forces, if you would. Conversely, you could even create a scenario where perhaps the planetar in and of itself is the tyrannical leader or the tyrannical dictator, and the planetar has become a fallen angel due to its falling from grace, as it were, and it's become resentful and bitter of the deity that banished it, and now it seeks vengeance, or it seeks to create its own kingdom or empire where it rules alone over everything else. And the party has to make their way over there and stop this fallen planetar from achieving this goal, right? And kind of ruling its own slice of the material plane or of the entirety of the plane. Also earlier mentioned in the lore, planetars, devas, and solars, they don't require food, drink, or sleep. So you can have an enemy, if you go the route of the fallen angel who's flipped sides, swapped over to the opposite team, you can have effectively an enemy that's just incessant, never stops, never relents, just constantly trying to achieve its greatness in its own way, right? In which you could really incorporate some interesting things, especially when you get to the aspect of encountering the planetar. If you were to use this fallen angel aspect of it, I mean, the planetar itself has divine awareness, so it knows if it's hearing a lie, which means that any form of deception, I would say even means of intimidation and things of that nature would probably lead to having no effect, due to the fact that the planetar knows if it's hearing something that is, I mean, the stat block says specifically it knows if it hears a lie, but I would widen that a little bit. I would broaden that rather to the planetar knows if it hears hollow words, almost, right? In which an intimidation or a type of trying to persuade them might fall flat, might not work if that was the way you wanted to go about it. You could also go the route actually of trying to create an instance. I'm going to stick with this fallen angel Planetar scenario because I think it's pretty cool. You could even go with the aspect or the notion, the concept of your players or the party has to figure out a way to overcome or defeat the Planetar without necessarily using the means of violence to do it, right? I mean, Planetars, as I said, they're like the foot soldiers of deities. They almost seem to have a strange bloodlust, even though they're supposed to be aligned to a lawful good morality. They almost seem to revel in conflict and combat, which I find very interesting. So you could use that where the party knows that they can't overcome the Planetar by combative means. So maybe they need to figure out a way to outsmart the Planetar. Maybe they need to figure out a way to contain the Planetar, right? In which you could then still implement later on down the line, you could implement the twist of the maniacal wizard or the tyrannical emperor that has this kind of secret laboratory where they're taking these Planetars and trying to drain them of their power and essence so they can implement it upon themselves. And that kind of keeps the campaign moving, keeps the adventure moving, right? Upon one enemy, or rather upon overcoming an enemy, you now have another conflict or form of opposition that the party must overcome, basically. It also states in the specific lore block to the Planetar that the Planetar can call down rain to relieve a drought, can loose insect plagues to devour crops. I mean, you could expand that, you could do the whole biblical 7 plagues, but even just those 2, you can cause a lot of havoc. Perhaps this fallen Planetar, this fallen angel Planetar has been causing nothing but chaos within the area of the material plane in which it chooses to reside, right? Perhaps the villages or the towns have been just kind of washed away by a crazy deluge, torrential rainstorms that went on for weeks or months. Perhaps the once strong kingdom of said emperor, empress, or king or queen is, suffering now due to this strange rash of locusts and insects consuming their crops. So now suddenly they are losing their food stores, right? They're having to pull from reserves, and things are becoming more and more difficult to keep everyone full and happy. And now because of that, perhaps they send the party on to discover the reason for these insect plagues. Or, I mean, you wouldn't characterize them as a plague when narrating necessarily, but this kind of spike in activity that's destroying their crops, right? I mean, even floods, heavy rains can drown out plants, stuff of that nature. So you could go a variety of ways here, right? But perhaps they charge the party with the task of figuring out and solving what's happening to their crops. Then, as the party makes their way forward to see what they can do, perhaps they discover, maybe not combat encounters, but perhaps they stumble upon a kind of scene of slaughter and destruction of maybe a tribe of orcs or goblins, or, maybe other people. They go to another town to see if maybe those townsfolk have been suffering the same thing. And they go there and they just see that everyone's just been eviscerated and destroyed. And perhaps there's 1 or 2 survivors who regale them with the story, with the tale of this green-skinned, hairless, angelic creature that came down to them. And they saw it as a boon. They saw it as a blessing to their town. But in fact, it was an omen of destruction and chaos. And that the creature came down and decimated everything, in which you could have them then go back and relay that information to the authority, to the tyrant, to the empress, to the king, to whomever, right? And say, well, it sounds like this, or perhaps we should speak with the town's priesthood and see what this description is. And the town's priesthood, then they convey to you that it is, yes, it's in fact a Planetar, and that they're this, kind of celestial being and all of that. And you can give your players a little bit of information on what they're up against. And at this point, you can see if they decide to go the combative route or go the might of mind type route, where they see if they can outwit or outsmart the Planetar. They see if they can maybe capture the Planetar. You know, perhaps the Planetar is in the priesthood. Perhaps the Planetar is one of the priests that's trying to lay about in plain sight. You know, Planetars don't have shape-shifting, I don't believe. They don't, but that doesn't mean that your Planetar doesn't have shape-shifting, right? Remember, all of these are malleable guidelines that you can kind of work with and massage into a form that works for you and your adventure and what you're trying to bring out, you know, the type of story and environment and experience you're trying to provide your players with, right? So I think that that's a pretty good way to use a Planetar as kind of the main focal point of your adventure or even of your campaign, right? You can have it build up to this large event all the way from level 1 or level 3. I mean, the Planetar is what, challenge rating 16. So you got a ways to go if you're starting from level 1 to have your players encounter this Planetar and figure out what they're going to do with it. You know, you could even, if your players are not so bloodthirsty or not so combat centric, let's say, you could even have the Planetar appear at lower levels. You know, when your players are at lower levels, you can have it appear and toy with them. You can have it appear and perhaps try to, you know, stop them before they get too powerful where they become a serious issue and the players have no choice. They have to flee. Perhaps they have to figure out a way to convince the Planetar that that's not their goal, that they're not trying to make their way out to the point where they can stop this Planetar from taking over. Perhaps your players have been contacted by another angel, by like a deva or something like that, and now they've been charged with the task of gaining enough power and strength and ability to stop the Planetar. And that's going to take 15, 16 levels before they get to that point. So there's a lot of interplay here that you could implement with angels. But as it stands, that's what I've got for the Planetar right now. And coming up next is the Solar. All right, folks. The Solar takes up page 18 of the monster manual, and let's jump right in. Solar. A Solar is godlike in its glory and power. On the battlefield, the Solar's sword flies into the fray on its own, and a single arrow from a Solar's bow can strike a target dead on contact. So great is a Solar's celestial might that even demon princes shrink at its resonant commands. It is said that only 24 Solars exist. The few Solars that are known are stewards of specific deities. The others rest in a state of contemplation, waiting for the time when their services are needed to stave off some cosmic threat to the cause of good. That's super cool. So Solars are effectively like the captains or the commanders of the angelic armies of the gods. They look pretty gnarly too. They look pretty awesome. All right, onto the Solar stat block. The Solar is a large celestial with a lawful good alignment. It has an armor class of 21, which is natural armor. It has an average of 243 hit points or 18d10 plus 144. Gosh. It has a walking speed of 50 feet and a flying speed of 150 feet. The Solar has a strength of 26, a dexterity of 22, a constitution of 26, an intelligence of 25, a wisdom of 25, and charisma of 30. The Solar's saving throws include intelligence plus 14, wisdom plus 14, and charisma plus 17. Skills include perception at plus 14. Damage resistance. The Solar has damage resistance to radiant, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons. It is immune to necrotic and poison damage. The Solar is immune to the conditions of charm and exhaustion, frightened, and poison. The Solar senses include true sight at 120 feet and passive perception of 24. Like other angels, the Solar can speak all languages and has telepathy at 120 feet. The challenge rating of a Solar is 21. So this is endgame stuff, folks. A Solar is certainly an endgame creature if your plan is to have the Solar as an enemy for your party. Now, onto its abilities. Angelic weapons. The Solar's weapon attacks are magical. When the Solar hits with any weapon, the weapon deals an extra 6d8 radiant damage, which is included in the attack. Divine awareness. The Solar knows if it hears a lie. Innate spellcasting. The Solar's spellcasting ability is Charisma with a spell save DC of 25. It can innately cast the following spells requiring no material components. At will, can cast Detect Evil and Good and Invisibility on itself only. 3 times a day, the Solar can cast each Blade Barrier, Dispel Evil and Good, and Resurrection. Once a day, the Solar can cast each Commune and Control Weather. Magic resistance. The Solar has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. On to the actions. Multi-attack. The Solar makes 2 Greatsword attacks. Greatsword is a melee weapon attack with a plus 15 to hit, a reach of 5 feet on one target. On a hit, it deals average 22 or 4d6 plus 8 slashing damage plus average 27 or 6d8 radiant damage. Slaying Longbow. Ranged weapon attack with plus 13 to hit and a range of 120 to 600 feet on one target. On a hit, it deals an average of 15 or 2d8 plus 6 piercing damage plus an average of 27 or 6d8 radiant damage. If the target is a creature that has 100 hit points or fewer, it must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or die. Wow, that's insane. Okay, cool. Let's continue. Flying Sword. The Solar releases its Greatsword to hover magically in an unoccupied space within 5 feet of it. If the Solar can see the sword, the Solar can mentally command it as a bonus action to fly up to 50 feet and either make one attack against a target or return to the Solar's hands. If the hovering sword is targeted by any effect, the Solar is considered to be holding it. The hovering sword falls if the Solar dies. Healing Touch. 4 times a day. The Solar touches another creature. The target magically regains an average of 40 or 8d8 plus 4 hit points and is freed from any curse, disease, poison, blindness, or deafness. Now, for the legendary actions. The Solar can take 3 legendary actions, choosing from the options below. Only one legendary action option can be used at a time and only at the end of another creature's turn. The Solar regains spent legendary actions at the start of its turn. Teleport. The Solar magically teleports, along with any equipment it's wearing or carrying, up to 120 feet to an unoccupied space that it can see. Searing Burst. Costs 2 actions. The Solar emits magical divine energy. Each creature of its choice in a 10-foot radius must make a DC 23 dexterity saving throw, taking an average of 14 or 4d6 fire damage plus an average of 14 or 4d6 radiant damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. Blinding Gaze, which costs 3 actions. The Solar targets one creature it can see within 30 feet of it. If the target can see it, the target must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or be blinded until magic such as the Lesser Restoration spell removes the blindness. Very cool. So Solars are certainly the top tier of the angels. They can cause some serious damage. You certainly want them on your side. Or maybe you don't. I don't know what kind of campaign you're running. And if that's the case, then they make for a very, very good end game final boss, if you would. Even, I would say you could have them be even a general type of minion, to the final boss. But I mean, the next step up would be the deity themselves, I guess, or a Tarask or something. You could have a bunch of Solars defending a Tarask just to ensure that it doesn't go too crazy or something like that. But anyway, on to some adventure crafting here. So the Solar is clearly a high tier enemy. You would need 4 players at level 21 to stand a chance of defeating the Solar, which is pretty tough, especially since the typical limit of leveling is a maximum of level 20, so it's already designed to be a challenge at maximum level. But I could see some adventures being formed or a campaign being formed with the Solar as the final encounter. I could even see it being, the end goal for a long campaign, It could lead up to that point. Solars are very interesting in the way that they are the only form of angel that seems to be limited, right? With the Deva and the Planetar, there was no talk or no information given about the quantity, how many there are. Whereas with the Solar, it specifically states that there are only 24 of them that exist. So you could definitely implement something like that where there are 24 Solar in total. Perhaps 4 of the Solar, perhaps 10 of the Solar, perhaps 12, maybe half, have fallen to corruption. Perhaps they're fallen angels, they've fallen from grace, and they're kind of causing havoc and chaos within the celestial plane. Perhaps they've decided that they're trying to, or they've decided that it's their divine right now to overtake the deities that presently are in power and claim that power for themselves. Another way that you could use the fallen angel method for a Solar, if you wanted to use a Solar as an enemy at the end of your game, you could use the Solar as perhaps an entity that's been corrupted by a demonic creature or devilish creature of equal or greater power. As there are 24 Solars, perhaps 1 or 2 or 3, some number of them have become corrupted by the devils of equivalent power to the deities. Perhaps they've fallen out of grace with the deity for some fatal mistake that they've made or a flaw in their judgment that has left them banished, and due to them being banished, they couldn't really present themselves on any of the material planes, so they had to go down to the 9 hells, and with the notion of being resentful or bitter towards their previous deity, they go to a devil and serve the devil that is the exact opposite to their deity, just as a means of kind of putting a finger in the eye of the deity that they served so loyally for so long. That would be a very good way to implement a Solar and then use them as a final boss, I think. I mean, even then you would use them as the general to the deity, though the deity will never really die, right? Just aspects of the deity die and they return after some time, or they still have all their other aspects. But a Solar can be pretty interesting. I mean, it has a lot of power, a lot of abilities. It has telepathy. You could use a Solar as a guide, even since it has telepathy. You could use a Solar where perhaps the Solar is conversing with the party and is trying to convince the party to perhaps unlock a chained or contained monster or demon or devil. And the Solar's charge is to defeat this creature, but perhaps they can't gain access to the creature due to the confines that the demon or devil or what have you, what have you, finds itself in at the moment. Perhaps it's one of those things where there's, a very high powered devil who has been contained by, some ritual magic, be it holy magic or some form of wizardry or sorcery that has left it locked down so it couldn't emerge once again to the planes, the material planes, and wreak the havoc and corruption and destruction that it can wreak. You could even create an instance where perhaps the Solar has been charged with the task of guarding this creature, this devilish creature, in order to prevent it from escaping, and the creature has escaped. Or you could have it work out where the creature has been bound and confined and chained by some magic, be it ritual magic through wizardry and sorcery, be it divine magic through either other deities or through other angelic beings. And the Solar might see the task as beneath them, or perhaps boring to them, or unworthy of their time and power and might. So they invoke the powers or the capabilities and abilities of the adventuring party to break free this demon or devil. And when they release the demon or devil, the Solar now has reason to jump back into the fray and combat that it so sorely misses. And it cuts down the demon or devil, completing its task, as it no longer needs to be there to guard it, since it's now been destroyed, and seeks to move on to greater things, which the deity could provide, give it ascension back to the celestial plane, or perhaps give it a little chunk of the celestial kingdom for it to look over and watch over. Inversely, perhaps the deity becomes upset with the Solar for altering the direct objective or the direct command given to them, and punishes the Solar, thus making it a fallen angel. And the Solar now is stuck to wander the mortal planes or the nine hells or the abyss, and the players are required to stop this Solar from causing the havoc it's now going to cause. Or perhaps they're responsible for destroying this Solar because they caused it. You know, their actions, the consequences of the actions are that by helping the Solar, they've damned the Solar, and now the Solar has to be destroyed and dealt with. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of mutate this and create an interesting adventure for your players and for your party. The Solar specifically seems to be more endgame material as opposed to starting an adventure or starting a campaign with your players. But that doesn't mean that you can't use the Solar, you know, throughout the way, throughout the story beats. You know, perhaps at certain levels they acquire things to present to the Solar. Actually, that's an entirely different adventure that you could implement. You could implement a campaign that's almost like a redemption story, where the party has to travel to these different, you know, archives and vaults and sanctuaries and kind of, you know, forgotten locations on the material plane and other planes, perhaps, to collect the armaments and all of the effects of the Solar and bring it back to rearm the Solar, to gift the Solar with its lost arms and armor and, you know, stuff of that nature, because there is some almost apocalyptic end time that's coming by means of demon and or devil. And so the entirety of the campaign can be to progress through the worlds in order to achieve these things and return them to the Solar, so that the Solar may rise again and stop the monster, stop the evil, you know, and bring the world to peace. And if you go the fallen angel route that sees the Solar wanting to redeem itself in the eyes of its deity and gain some form of divine redemption, then this would be a really good way to kind of bring that story along, that narrative along with your adventurers, and kind of invest them in helping out the Solar, especially if the Solar proves itself to be helpful and kind and considerate and appreciative. You know, it kind of goes against the possible flaws of angels, where they can see themselves as superior to other mortal beings due to the fact that their notions and their judgments are almost never incorrect, right? This sense of supremacy. Perhaps the banishment of the Solar, which brought him down to walk amongst the mortals or within the material planes, has humbled them and has left them wanting and needing to redeem themselves, but they can't achieve it on their own. Perhaps there's a way that the deity has blocked them from retaining or obtaining their power. And at the end, your players have assisted this Solar in returning to its former glory, as it were. in which case you can have the Solar assist the players, or the players assist the Solar in defeating the final boss. That can be on a large scale. I mean, you could even have them go up against a Tarrasque, like a corrupted Tarrasque that's been possessed by a lich, or, by some demonic being, perhaps, or by some devil that, some devilish fiend that's managed to tame the Tarrasque and rides it into battle. And they can assist in that final glorious battle. Or in turn, once they've provided all of these effects back to the Solar could turncoat, right, and become the villain and become evil, and they now have to seek out means of defeating and overcoming this corrupted Solar, as it were. Either way, there's a lot of different paths that you can take with all three of these angels. In general, and the subclasses, you can create many adventures. You could create a singular adventure that can be epic and big and kind of have that classical, very much so good versus evil story and hero's journey. You can create an entire campaign, from level 1 to 20 that involves all of these subclasses, or rather subtypes of angel. You could start it midway through a campaign at level 10, right? Starting with a Deva that comes down. You can have interplay, like cross-pollination of these creature types, as they are apparently different rankings of angels. You could have them kind of interplay with each other. Perhaps the Solar is fallen, and now the Deva and the Planetar are seeking out means to stop the Solar. Perhaps the Solar is fallen and is seeking to redeem itself, but cannot communicate with the deity or anything of that nature. However, somehow has the means to communicate with the Planetar and or the Deva, and is using them to kind of be the mouthpiece or the mediator of what needs to be accomplished in order to return them to their glory. Perhaps there's a conflict between deities, and the deities are resolving that conflict through this kind of grappling match, this ebb and flow back and forth of one deity's Solar and another deity's Solar. You could even have an instance where this is something so simple as perhaps a Solar and a Planetar of two differing deities are sitting with each other at a table, playing a game, something to the effect of two kings back in the day playing chess against each other to see which kingdom would overcome the other. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of mutate and orient an adventure to fit angels in with your campaign and to drive a story along, and in ways that could be actually quite intriguing to your players, in the way of the different layers of depth, like an onion. You peel back one and there's another layer beneath it, and you peel back that one all the way down until you get to the core, in which perhaps you receive an encounter with the deity of these angels, or perhaps you have to stop these corrupted angels themselves, to which could create a boon for your players. Perhaps at the end of it all, after your players defeat this final boss of a Solar at such a high level, and once they overcome them and defeat them, this corrupted fallen angel, perhaps the deity that once commanded this Solar presents an aspect of itself to the players, and with gratitude and appreciation for their actions, decides to present all the players with a boon and allows them to become the next rankings or wave of Planetar, Solar, and Deva, for them to guard all the realms for eternity, which I think would make for a very nice ribbon, or a very nice bow on the present that is the campaign. Be a nice way to end things off. And perhaps when you start your next campaign, the major players, the major celestial players or representatives of them, are the previous player characters of the party. But that's all I have for you folks today. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to these episodes of Monsters Manifested covering angels. I really appreciate it. And I'll be back again next week with the next episode, which, if I'm not mistaken, covers animated objects. Yes, it does. So next week, Monster Manifested will be animated objects. I'm not sure yet whether or not I'm going to do a multi-part series of episodes like I did with angels. but I might just go through them individually so that I can focus on them more specifically and kind of build upon their stat blocks and their lore, kind of give them each the spotlight. But feel free to let me know what you all thought about changing up the format a little bit like this to go from the general creature type down to the specific creature types. And I'll be sure to listen to your thoughts and opinions, and I'll adjust accordingly to see what works for you. You can contact me at maxmccool.dm@gmail.com and let me know what you think and how I could improve this podcast for you, how I could make it better, make it more engaging. Perhaps there's something you like that you'd like to see more of or hear more of, I suppose. Perhaps there's something that you're not quite fond of and you'd like to see me kind of cut down on or cut short a little bit. I'm open to all constructive criticisms and thoughts and opinions, and I'd love to hear from you folks. If there's anything specific you'd like me to talk about, please let me know. I do intend to go through the entirety of the monster manual alphabetically from A to Z, but I can make some special changes if I get a lot of requests from you on what you'd like to hear me talk about and what creatures you'd like to see me make adventures for. So once again, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you folks next week. Have a good day.